In the winter of 1889, the British aristocracy witnessed a scandal so humiliating they whispered about it for a decade. Lady Alara Vance did everything right. She was poised, she was obedient, and she was contractually bound to the wealthiest duke in England since the day she took her first breath. It was supposed to be the wedding of the century. But as she stood at the altar of St. Jude's veil covering her face, the Duke didn't say, "I do." He turned to the front pew, looked at Alara's own sister, and destroyed a dynasty with 5 simple words. This is the story of the bride who was left behind, and the revenge she never saw coming. The contract was signed in ink, but it felt like it was forged in blood. Alara Vance knew the terms before she knew her alphabet. She was the eldest daughter of the Earl of Callaway, a man whose title was as old as the stones of their crumbling estate, but whose coffers were filled with nothing but dust and gambling debts. The solution to the Callaway ruin was Alara, specifically her womb. 18 years ago, the Earl had struck a deal with the late Duke of Blackwood. The two men over snifters of brandy and the smoke of expensive cigars had agreed that the Earl's firstborn daughter would marry the Duke's heir, Silas Thorne. It was a transaction, a merger. The Vances would get the Blackwood fortune to restore their rotting roof. The Thornes, a family of new money and industrial soot, would get the ancient Callaway bloodline to legitimize their place at court. Alara had accepted this fate with the stoicism of a soldier marching to the front lines. She was not a beauty. She knew this. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a face that was too sharp, eyes that were too observant, and a mouth that rarely smiled. She was handsome, her aunt would say, which was polite code for plain. But she was intelligent. She spent her nights reading ledgers, learning how to manage an estate, preparing to be the duchess Silas Thorne needed. She wrote him letters, dutiful, witty intellectual letters, discussing the price of wool or the politics of the House of Lords. He rarely wrote back. "It doesn't matter if he loves you, Alara," her father Earl Henry had told her one rainy Tuesday, flicking ash onto the carpet she had mended herself. "He promised to marry you. That is the law of gentlemen." The problem was Alara wasn't the only daughter. 3 years after Alara was born, Lydia arrived. Lydia was everything Alara was not. Where Alara was sharp angles and silence, Lydia was soft curves and golden laughter. Lydia had hair the color of spun honey and eyes like cornflowers. She was useless at mathematics, couldn't tell a tenant farmer from a footman, and spent the family's limited allowance on silk ribbons. But she was enchanting. When Silas Thorne finally returned from his grand tour of Europe to claim his bride, he rode up the driveway of Callaway Manor on a black stallion. Alara stood on the steps, her hands clasped tightly to stop them from shaking. She was 21. He was 25. She stepped forward to greet him, a rehearsed speech on her tongue. "Your Grace," she began, dipping into a perfect curtsy. "Welcome to—" Silas didn't see her. His dark, brooding gaze had drifted over her shoulder, past her sensible grey wool dress, and landed on the figure standing in the doorway. Lydia. Lydia was wearing a dress of pale blue muslin, ill-suited for the cold, but perfect for showing off the flush of her chest. She giggled a sound like wind chimes and dropped a handkerchief. Silas dismounted. He didn't bow to Alara. He walked right past her, his boots crunching on the gravel, and picked up the handkerchief. He handed it to Lydia, their fingers brushing for a second too long. "I believe you dropped this," Silas said, his voice a low rumble that Alara felt in her chest. "Thank you, Your Grace," Lydia whispered, looking up through her lashes. Alara stood frozen on the gravel, the wind biting through her wool. She saw the look in Silas's eyes. It wasn't the look of a man meeting his future sister-in-law. It was the look of a starving man seeing a feast. That night at dinner, Ilara tried to engage him. "I read your speech regarding the railway expansion in the north," my lord Ilara said, cutting her pheasant precisely. "I thought your points on labour reform were bold." Silas blinked, looking at her as if a piece of furniture had started speaking. "Thank you, Lady Ilara. It is dry business?" "Oh, I think trains are terribly frightening," Lydia chimed in, taking a sip of wine she was too young to drink. "All that smoke and noise. I prefer a carriage. It's so much more intimate." Silas smiled. It was the first time Ilara had seen him smile. "I shall have to ensure you always have the finest carriage, Lady Lydia." The Earl laughed, nervously clinking his glass. "Yes, well, to the wedding. Only 1 month away." Ilara caught her father's eye. He looked away, sweat beading on his forehead. He saw it too. But the contract was ironclad. Silas Thorne had to marry the eldest daughter. It was the only way the debts would be paid. For the next month, Ilara became a ghost in her own house. She watched from the library window as Silas and Lydia walked in the garden. She saw them standing too close by the rose bushes. She saw Lydia touching his arm, whispering secrets. "He is just being polite," Ilara told herself, gripping the velvet curtains until her knuckles turned white. "He is a duke. He has honor. He will do his duty." She was wrong. The morning of the wedding, London was blanketed in a thick, suffocating fog. St. Jude's Cathedral was packed to the rafters. 500 guests, the cream of society. They were there to see the union of the massive Blackwood fortune and the prestigious Calloway name. Ilara stood in the vestry staring at her reflection. The dress was magnificent white satin, imported from Paris, encrusted with pearls that cost more than the Calloway estate earned in a year. Her father had borrowed heavily against the dowry to pay for it. "You look adequate," her mother said, adjusting Ilara's veil. Her mother was a tired woman, worn down by the Earl's gambling, and she just wanted this over with. "Remember, keep your chin up. Do not look at your feet, and for God's sake, try to look happy. You are becoming a duchess." "Where is Lydia?" Ilara asked. "She is already seated," her mother said, dismissing the question. "She complained of a headache this morning, but she is in the front pew." Ilara felt a cold knot in her stomach. She hadn't seen Lydia since breakfast. The organ music swelled the wedding march. The heavy oak doors swung open. Ilara took her father's arm. The Earl was trembling. He smelled of brandy. "Walk," he hissed. They began the long procession down the aisle. The faces of the guests were a blur of colours. Ilara fixed her eyes on the altar. Silas was there. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black dress coat, his posture rigid. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. As Ilara drew closer, she realized he wasn't just nervous. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. They reached the altar. The Earl handed Ilara's hand to Silas. Silas's hand was ice cold. He didn't squeeze her fingers. He didn't even turn to face her. The Archbishop cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The ceremony dragged on. The incense made Ilara lightheaded. She felt like she was underwater. Finally they reached the vows. "Do you, Silas Edward Thorne, Duke of Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The Archbishop asked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "To have and to hold from this day forward." Silence. It stretched for 1 second, then 2, then 5. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Someone coughed. Ilara turned to look at Silas. "My lord," she whispered. Silas finally turned. He looked down at her, and for the first time, Elara saw genuine emotion in his eyes. It was pity. "I cannot," Silas said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the silence of the cathedral, it sounded like a gunshot. The Archbishop blinked. "Your Grace, I cannot marry her," Silas said louder, this time turning to face the crowd. "I cannot swear a vow before God that is a lie." The crowd gasped. The sound was like a wave crashing. Elara's father stepped forward, his face purple. "Thorn, what is the meaning of this?" "The contract." "To hell with the contract," Silas roared. He ripped his hand away from Elara as if she burned him. He walked past Elara down the 3 steps of the altar. He stopped at the front pew. Lydia was sitting there wearing a dress of pale lavender. She was crying, holding a handkerchief to her mouth. But Elara, standing paralyzed at the altar, knew her sister. She saw the way Lydia's eyes darted up, checking who was watching. Silas held out his hand to Lydia. "I cannot marry Elara," Silas declared, his voice ringing with a twisted sort of nobility, "because my heart belongs to another. I will not condemn 3 lives to misery for the sake of a piece of paper." Lydia stood up, looking fragile and tragic. She took his hand. "Silas," she sobbed. "We shouldn't." "The scandal." "Let them talk," Silas said, pulling her close. He looked back at Elara, who was standing alone at the altar, the empty space beside her, screaming of rejection. "Elara," Silas said. He didn't apologize. He sounded reasonable, as if he were explaining a business change. "You are a sensible woman. You know we have no passion. You would be miserable with me. Lydia carries my heart." And he paused, dropping his voice just enough that only the front rows and Elara could hear. "She carries my air." The world stopped. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. Pregnant. Lydia was pregnant. While Elara had been writing him letters about wool prices, Silas had been bedding her sister in the garden of her own home. The Earl of Calloway let out a strangled noise and collapsed into the pew, clutching his chest. The mother screamed. Elara didn't scream. She didn't faint. She slowly reached up and unpinned the veil from her hair. It fell to the stone floor in a puddle of lace. She looked at Silas holding her weeping, pregnant sister. She looked at the guests who were staring at her with a mix of horror and delicious entertainment. She was the woman who wasn't enough, the woman who was easily replaced. Elara straightened her spine. She was humiliated, yes. Her life was effectively over. But as she looked at Lydia, who was burying her face in Silas's coat to hide a triumphant smirk, something inside Elara snapped. The dutiful daughter died at that altar. Elara walked down the steps. She didn't run. She walked right up to the happy couple. Silas braced himself, perhaps expecting a slap. Elara ignored him. She looked at Lydia. "You have won the Duke," Elara said, her voice clear and cold as winter frost. "And you have won his bed. But remember this, sister, a position gained by treachery is a throne built on sand." She turned to Silas. "The contract stated you would marry a daughter of Calloway to clear the family debt. You have chosen the younger one. The debt remains. But the price—" Elara looked him dead in the eye. "The price has just doubled." She turned and walked back down the aisle alone, head high, while the crowd parted for her, like the Red Sea, leaving the chaos of the happy couple behind her. She walked out of the church doors and into the fog. She had no husband. She had no money. She had no family she could trust. But for the first time in her life, she was free. And she had a plan. The London fog had turned into a relentless, freezing rain by the time Elara reached the heavy iron gates of Blackwood House. She had not gone back to her father's rented townhouse. She knew exactly what awaited her there, a mother weeping over lost social standing, and a father likely drinking himself into a stupor, already calculating which distant cousin he could beg money from. They would blame her. They would ask why she hadn't fought harder, why she hadn't seduced Silas earlier, why she had let her younger sister steal the prize. Ilara was done with being the sacrificial lamb. She pulled the bell at the servants' entrance of Blackwood House. The irony did not escape her. An hour ago she was supposed to enter through the front doors as the Duchess. Now she stood shivering in the mud, her ruined wedding dress hidden under a rough wool cloak she had purchased from a street vendor, with the only coin in her pocket, a lucky gold sovereign her grandfather had given her years ago. The door creaked open. A scullery maid peered out, her eyes widening as she recognized the woman beneath the hood. "Lady Ilara," the girl gasped. "I am here to see the Dowager Duchess." Ilara said, her voice shaking from cold but not from fear. "Take me to her, immediately." "But her Grace is resting. The scandal." "Tell her," Ilara cut in, "that if she wishes to save the Blackwood fortune from the ruin her grandson is about to bring upon it, she will see me." 10 minutes later, Ilara was standing in the private drawing room of Beatrix Thorne, the Dowager Duchess of Blackwood. Beatrix was 80 years old, a woman carved from granite and old lace. She sat in a high-backed velvet chair, gripping a cane topped with a silver hawk's head. She stared at Ilara, taking in the wet hair, the mud-splattered hem of the wedding gown peeking out from the cloak, and the burning fire in the young woman's eyes. "You have nerve, girl," Beatrix croaked. "My grandson humiliates you before God and all of London, and you come to his house? I have nowhere else to go," Ilara said simply. She didn't curtsy. She walked to the fire to warm her hands. "My father has spent my dowry. My sister has stolen my future husband. I am, for all intents and purposes, a pariah." "And you want charity?" Beatrix sneered. "I thought you were the proud one." "I don't want charity. I want an investment." Ilara turned to face the old woman. "Silas is a fool. He thinks with his trousers. He married Lydia because she is soft and pliable and flatters his ego. But Lydia spends money faster than a leaking ship takes on water. And Silas is over-leveraged." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I read the ledgers, Your Grace. During the engagement, Silas sent them to me because he couldn't be bothered to review the tenant disputes. I know about the railway investment in the north. He poured 3/4 of the liquid capital into the Trans-Pennine line. It's a high-risk venture. If the steel shipments are delayed, the penalty clauses will bankrupt this estate within 2 years. The room went silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Beatrix looked at Ilara with a new expression. It wasn't kindness, but it was respect. "He didn't tell me about the penalty clauses," Beatrix muttered. "He doesn't read the fine print," Ilara countered. "I do." Ilara stepped closer. "Lydia is pregnant, or so she says. That child secures her place. I cannot touch her, but I can ensure that when Silas inevitably crashes this family into the ground, there is someone left to pick up the pieces. And that someone is you." "I want a loan," Ilara said. £5,000, and the deed to the derelict warehouse in the Docklands, the one on Wapping High Street, that has been sitting empty since your husband died. In exchange, I will sign a document renouncing any claim to a breach of promise suit. I will disappear. I will not embarrass the family further." Beatrix tapped her cane on the floor, a rhythmic, thinking sound. 5,000 is a fortune. "It is the price of your grandson's freedom," Ilara said. "And it is cheap compared to what the lawyers would charge you if I sued him for emotional distress and breach of contract." Beatrix let out a dry, raspy laugh. I always told Henry he was betting on the wrong daughter. Lydia is a decorative vase. You are a knife." The dowager opened the drawer of her writing desk and pulled out a checkbook and a heavy iron key. "The warehouse is a rat-infested shell," Beatrix warned, scribbling on the check. "And the money is a loan, not a gift. You will pay me back with 5% interest in 2 years, or I will have you thrown in debtor's prison myself." "I'll pay you back in 1, Ilara said, taking the check. "One more thing," the dowager said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Lydia, the child. Do you think it is Silas's?" Ilara paused at the door. She looked back, her face in shadow. "Lydia has many talents, Your Grace. Counting days on a calendar has never been one of them. But that is your puzzle to solve." With the check tucked into her corset and the heavy iron key in her hand, Ilara walked out of Blackwood House. She didn't look back. She hailed a hackney carriage. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, eyeing her strange attire. "Wapping," Ilara said. "And drive fast." She was no longer Lady Ilara, the jilted bride. She was Ilara Vance, and she had work to do. The warehouse on Wapping High Street was worse than Beatrix had described. It was a cavernous, rotting brick beast sitting on the edge of the Thames. The windows were smashed, the roof leaked, and the floor was thick with the grime of a decade of neglect. It smelled of dead fish and coal smoke. Ilara stood in the center of the empty space, the morning light filtering through the holes in the roof. She had been living in a small boarding house for a week, using a fraction of the dowager's money to buy sensible clothes, dark serge skirts, white blouses, and sturdy boots. She had cut her long, heavy hair into a practical bob that sat just above her shoulders, a scandalous style that made her look modern and severe. She wasn't here to store goods. She was here to build. During her years of managing her father's crumbling estate, Ilara had noticed a gap in the market. The industrial boom was happening, but the logistics were a nightmare. Factories produced steel, but it sat on docks for weeks, waiting for ships. Ships arrived but had no wagons to offload to. Ilara planned to turn this warehouse into a distribution hub, a middle ground where goods could be sorted, packaged, and deployed instantly. Efficiency. That was the commodity she was selling, but she needed steel beams to reinforce the rotting upper floors. That afternoon, she walked into the Stirling Ironworks. It was a place no lady should ever go. The heat was physical, a wall of scorching air that smelled of sulfur and sweat. Men stripped to the waist hammered at glowing orange metal. The noise was deafening. Ilara marched through the soot holding a handkerchief to her nose until she found the office a glass box overlooking the factory floor. She knocked and entered without waiting for an answer. The man behind the desk was shouting at a foreman. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms stained with grease and scarred from burns. He had dark hair that looked like he cut it himself with a knife, and eyes the color of cold steel. This was Liam Stirling. New money. Rough. Dangerous. He was rumors of street fights and hostile takeovers made flesh. "I'm busy," he barked, not even looking up from his blueprints. "If you're selling charity tickets for the orphans, the answer is no. Get out." "I'm not here for charity, Mr. Stirling," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the industrial din. "I am here to buy 10 tons of structural I-beams, and I need them delivered by Monday." Liam slowly looked up. He took in Ilara's severe haircut, her plain clothes, and the determined set of her jaw. He leaned back in his chair, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "We have a 6-week waiting list," Liam said, his voice rough like gravel. "And I don't deal with individuals. Who do you represent?" "Vance Logistics," Ilara lied smoothly. "A new firm." "Vance," Liam squinted. like the Earl of Callaway. No relation, Elara said quickly. Do you want the sale or not? Liam stood up. He was intimidatingly large, towering over her. He walked around the desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. I know who you are. You're the girl Silas Thorne left at the altar last week. It was in all the papers. Elara felt the sting of humiliation, but she didn't flinch. My personal life is irrelevant to business, Mr. Sterling. Is it? Liam scoffed. You're a lady. You've never worked a day in your life. You're playing shop with Daddy's money because you're heartbroken. Go home, Lady Elara. This is a place for men who work, not girls who cry. Elara's eyes flashed. She slammed her hand down on his desk, right on top of his blueprints. You are currently bidding for the contract to supply rails for the Duke of Blackwood's Northern Line, she said. Liam went still. That is confidential. It is, Elara agreed. I also know that Silas is trying to drive the price down to £4 a ton. He's bluffing. He needs that rail by next month, or he triggers a penalty clause with the government that will cost him £50,000. If you hold your price at £6, he will pay it. He has no choice. Liam stared at her. The condescension vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory interest. How do you know about the penalty clause? Because I wrote the initial proposal, Elara said. I know his finances better than he does. I know his breaking point. She took a step closer to the large, intimidating man. I am not playing shop, Mr. Sterling. I am building an empire, and I am going to bury Silas Thorne. Now, do you want to help me, or do you want to keep underpricing your steel like a fool? For a long moment, the only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the steam hammers outside. Then a slow grin spread across Liam Sterling's face. It transformed him from a brute into something roguish and undeniably attractive. 10 tons of beams, Liam said. Delivered Monday, at cost. At cost. Elara raised an eyebrow. Why, because, Liam extended a calloused, dirty hand. I hate dukes, and I think I'm going to enjoy watching you work. Elara looked at his hand. It was the hand of a worker, a builder. It was everything Silas's soft, manicured hands were not. She took it. His grip was warm and firm. Elara, she corrected him. Just Elara. The lady died in the church. Liam, he replied. Welcome to the mud, Elara. As they shook hands, the door to the office burst open. A breathless clerk rushed in, holding a telegram. Mr. Sterling, urgent news from the exchange. Liam didn't let go of Elara's hand. What is it? It's the Duke of Blackwood, sir. The clerk stammered, looking nervously at Elara. He's announced a grand ball to celebrate the pregnancy of the new duchess, and he's selling off the Callaway estate to fund it. Elara went rigid. The Callaway estate, her home, her father's home. Silas couldn't sell it unless her father had signed it over to him as part of the dowry negotiation. He's evicting them, Elara whispered, realization dawning on her. He's throwing my parents onto the street to pay for a party for Lydia. She looked at Liam. The anger that had been simmering in her gut boiled over into something white-hot. Change of plans, Liam, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. I don't just need beams. I need an invitation to that ball. Liam's grin widened, but this time it was dangerous. Now you're talking. The invitation to the Blackwood Winter Ball was not easy to obtain, but Liam Sterling didn't ask for things. He bought them. He had purchased the debt of a minor baron who was on the guest list, and in exchange for forgiving the loan the baron had handed over his invitation. Are you sure about this? Liam asked. He was standing in the small parlour of Elara's rented rooms above a bakery in Cheapside. He looked uncomfortable in a tuxedo tugging at his stiff collar. Walking into the lion's den is one thing. Walking in wearing that is a declaration of war. Ilara turned away from the mirror. She was not wearing the pale pastels expected of a debutante, nor the drab greys of a spinster. She had used the last of the dowager's loan to commission a dress from a French modiste in Soho, who asked no questions. It was scarlet, a deep blood-red silk that shimmered like a fresh wound. The neckline was lower than polite society deemed appropriate, exposing the creamy expanse of her décolletage and shoulders. It was a dress designed for a woman who did not care about her reputation, because she had none left to lose. "I am not going there to make friends, Liam," Ilara said, fastening a simple black velvet choker around her neck. "I am going there to remind them that I am not dead." "They'll tear you apart," Liam warned, though his eyes lingered on her with undisguised admiration. "Let them try," Ilara replied. "I have steel in my spine now, Mr. Sterling, thanks to you." The carriage ride to Blackwood House was silent. When they arrived, the line of coaches stretched down the block. The house was ablaze with light music, spilling out into the cold night air. Ilara took Liam's arm. "Ready?" "I was born ready," he grunted. They ascended the marble staircase. The majordomo at the top of the stairs took their card, hesitated, and looked as if he might faint. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking. "Mr. Liam Sterling and Lady Ilara Vance." The ballroom went silent. The orchestra didn't stop, but the chatter died instantly. 300 heads turned. Ilara walked in. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead, her red dress blazing against the sea of black coats and white chiffon. Beside her, Liam looked like a dangerous bodyguard, his sheer size and the aura of industrial power making the aristocratic men look soft and pampered. Across the room, standing on a dais under a massive crystal chandelier, were Silas and Lydia. Lydia looked like a confection in pink lace, her hand resting conspicuously on her stomach, which showed the faintest hint of a swell. Silas stood beside her, looking regal, but tired. When Silas saw Ilara, he dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing in the silence. Ilara marched straight toward them, the crowd parting for her whispering behind their fans. "She has no shame. Look at that dress. Who is that brute with her?" Ilara stopped at the foot of the dais. She curtsied a mockery of the gesture she had made on the gravel driveway months ago. "Your Grace," Ilara said, her voice carrying clearly. "Duchess, a lovely party. I hear we are celebrating." Silas stepped down, his face pale. "Ilara, what are you doing here? You were not invited." "Mr. Sterling was," Ilara said, gesturing to Liam. "And I am his associate. We heard you were auctioning off the Calloway estate tonight to fund your domestic bliss. I couldn't miss the sale of my childhood home." Lydia stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "Get out, you are jealous, Ilara. You are a bitter old maid who—" "Quiet, Lydia," Ilara said. She didn't shout. She spoke to her sister the way one speaks to a misbehaving child. "You have your duke. You have your dress. Do not speak of things you do not understand." Ilara turned her gaze to her parents, who were cowering near the buffet table. Her father, the Earl, looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Her mother looked at the red dress with horror. They had sold her home to pay for Lydia's comfort. Ilara felt a pang of grief, but she smothered it with cold resolve. "The auction," Silas hissed, "is for serious buyers only. The reserve price is £10,000. He said it as a challenge, knowing Ilara had left the church with nothing. 10,000, Liam spoke up, his voice booming. He laughed. Is that all I carry that in my waistcoat? Silas bristled. And who are you? I'm the man who makes the steel you need for your trains. Your Grace. Liam smiled a shark-like baring of teeth. And if you want your rails delivered on time, I suggest you let the lady stay. Silas froze. He knew the precarious state of his finances. He couldn't afford to offend the owner of Sterling Iron Works. Fine, Silas spat. Stay, but do not expect a warm welcome. The music resumed, but the tension remained. Elara did not hide in the corner. She danced. She danced with Liam a scandalous waltz, where they held each other closer than propriety allowed. They are terrified of you, Liam whispered in her ear as he spun her. They are terrified of us, Elara corrected. Money and blood. It's a potent combination. Later that evening, the auction for the Calloway estate began. The auctioneer stood on a podium. Bidding starts at 5,000. 6,000, shouted a viscount. 7, countered a merchant. 10,000. Elara's voice cut through the room. Silas stared at her. You don't have £10,000. Mr. Sterling does, Elara said calmly, and he is buying it on my behalf, to turn it into a warehouse for wool storage. It seems fitting, doesn't it? The house that was paid for by selling a daughter will now store sheep. The room gasped. 12,000, Silas shouted. He couldn't let her have it. He couldn't let her desecrate the estate he had promised Lydia. 15, Elara said, not blinking. 18, Silas roared, sweat beading on his brow. Elara smiled. She leaned over to Liam. Stop. Liam crossed his arms and stayed silent. Going once, going twice. Sold to the Duke of Blackwood for £18,000. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. Silas stood there, chest heaving. He had won. But Elara looked delighted. She walked up to him one last time. Congratulations, Silas. You just spent £18,000. You don't have to buy a house you already owned by marriage rights. You just outbid yourself. Silas's eyes went wide as the realization hit him. He had been so consumed by pride, he hadn't realized she was driving the price up just to bleed him dry. Enjoy the debt, Elara whispered. She turned to Lydia, leaning in close to her sister's ear. And you, sister, be careful. Stress is bad for the baby. If there is a baby. Lydia flinched her hand, flying to her stomach, protectively, or perhaps guiltily. Elara swept out of the ballroom, her red dress trailing behind her like fire, leaving the Duke and Duchess victorious, but utterly defeated. 3 months had passed since the ball. Winter had turned to a wet grey spring. In the East End, Vance Logistics was booming. The warehouse on Wapping High Street was a hive of activity. Elara had revolutionized the supply chain. By coordinating the dock schedules with Liam's factory output, she had cut delivery times in half. Profits were soaring. But in the West End, the House of Blackwood was crumbling. Elara sat in her office at the warehouse. It was a stark contrast to the drawing rooms she was raised in bare brick walls, a simple oak desk and maps of London plastered everywhere. Liam leaned against the doorframe, eating an apple. He's here. Elara didn't look up from her ledger. Let him wait. He's been waiting for an hour, Elara. The man is pacing a hole in my floorboards. Good. Elara finally looked up. Her face was sharper now, the softness of her youth replaced by the hard angles of authority. Send him in. A moment later, Silas Thorne entered. He looked terrible. His coat was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, and he had lost weight. The stress of the last few months was eating him alive. The railway project was stalled. The £18,000 he had wasted on the Calloway estate meant he couldn't pay the contractors. The government penalty deadline was 1 week away. He stopped when he saw Elara sitting behind the desk. You, Silas breathed. I was told I was meeting the director of Vance Logistics. You are, Ilara said calmly. Please sit. Can I offer you tea? It's cheap, I'm afraid. We don't waste money on luxuries here. Silas didn't sit. He gripped the back of the chair. This is your company. I told you I was good at math. Silas, you never listened. Ilara closed the ledger. Why are you here? I need steel, Silas said, his voice raspy. Sterling refuses to sell to me. He says his entire stock is reserved for Vance Logistics. I need you to release the hold. If I don't get those rails by Friday, I lose the government contract. I lose everything. I know, Ilara said. I read the papers. Ilara, please. Silas's pride finally broke. He sank into the chair. Lydia, she is unwell. The doctors are expensive. The estate is mortgaged to the hilt. If this railway fails, we are destitute. Lydia is unwell, Ilara asked, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her eyes. How is the pregnancy progressing? Silas looked away. Complicated. She is fragile. She spends weeks in bed. She won't let anyone see her but her personal maid. Ilara exchanged a glance with Liam, who was standing in the corner. It confirmed their suspicions. Lydia was hiding something. I can give you the steel, Ilara said. Silas looked up, hope flooding his face. You will, Ilara, thank you. I knew you still had a heart. I knew. For a price, Ilara cut him off. She slid a document across the desk. This is a transfer of deed, Ilara explained. In exchange for the priority shipment of steel rails sufficient to save your contract, you will sign over the title of the Calloway estate to me. Not to a shell company. To me, Ilara Vance. But, Silas stammered, I just paid 18,000 for it. It's Lydia's favorite retreat. Then you have a choice, Ilara said, leaning back. Keep the house and lose the railway, the dukedom, and your reputation. Or give me the house and save your fortune. Silas stared at the paper. His hand shook. He looked at Liam, who offered no sympathy, only a cold stare. You are cruel, Silas whispered. I am a businesswoman, Ilara replied, and I am taking back what is mine. Silas picked up the pen. He signed. As he stood to leave, beaten and broken, Ilara spoke one last time. Silas, one piece of advice, free of charge. He paused at the door. Check the nursery, she said. I hear the pillows at Blackwood House are disappearing at an alarming rate. Silas frowned, confused, and walked out. When the door clicked shut, Liam let out a low whistle. You got the house back? I did, Ilara said. She didn't feel the rush of joy she expected. She felt a cold, hard satisfaction. But we aren't done, Liam. What's next? Now. Ilara stood up, walking to the map on the wall. Now we expose the lie. I hired a private investigator to watch Lydia. Do you know where she goes every Tuesday when she claims to be visiting the doctor? Where? An orphanage in Covent Garden, Ilara said. She isn't seeing a doctor. She is looking for a baby. Liam's eyes widened. She's not pregnant. She never was, Ilara said. She lied to trap a duke. And now that the 9 months are almost up, she needs a child to produce or the game is up. Ilara grabbed her coat. Get the carriage, Liam. We are going to pay the Duchess a visit. It's time to bring the walls down. The spider had spun her web. The fly was caught, and Ilara was ready to deliver the killing sting. The night the heir was due to arrive, the heavens opened over London. A thunderstorm of biblical proportions rattled the windows of Blackwood House, drowning out the sound of carriage wheels on the cobblestones outside. Inside the household was in a state of controlled panic. Servants rushed through the corridors with basins of hot water and piles of linen. The Duchess Lady Lydia had gone into labour early or so. the screaming from the master bedroom suggested. Down in the library, Silas Thorne, Duke of Blackwood, paced a hole in the Persian rug. He looked haggard. The steel rails from Ilara had arrived just in time to save the government contract, but the financial toll had been immense. He had lost the Calloway estate. He had lost his dignity, but he told himself it was worth it. He was about to have a son, an heir, a future. He poured himself a brandy, his hand trembling. "It will all be fine," he muttered to the empty room. "Once the boy is here, everything will be fine." He didn't hear the front door open. He didn't hear the heavy tread of boots or the rustle of a wet coat. He only looked up when the library doors were thrown open, banging against the walls. Ilara Vance stood there, framed by the lightning flashing in the hallway behind her. She was dripping wet, her hair plastered to her skull, her eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. Beside her stood Liam Sterling, looking like a grim reaper in a soaked trench coat. "Ilara." Silas gasped, nearly dropping his glass. "You cannot be here. Lydia is in labor. Get out." "Lydia is not in labor." "Silas," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the thunder. "Lydia is in a performance." "How dare you!" Silas surged forward, his exhaustion replaced by defensive anger. "She is the mother of my child. She is upstairs right now, suffering to give me an heir." "She is suffering, all right," Liam growled, stepping forward to block Silas's path. But not from childbirth, from panic. Ilara walked past Liam, advancing on the Duke. "We just came from the servants' entrance, Silas. We intercepted a woman named Mrs. Higgins. Does the name sound familiar?" "It should. She's the laundry woman Lydia hired last week." "I don't concern myself with the staff," Silas snapped. "You should," Ilara replied, "because Mrs. Higgins wasn't bringing in laundry tonight." Ilara nodded to Liam. Liam stepped back into the hallway and dragged a cowering, weeping woman into the room. She was clutching a large wicker laundry basket. "Show him," Ilara commanded. Liam ripped the lid off the basket. Silas looked down. He expected to see sheets. Instead, nestled among dirty linens, drugged with a mild opiate to keep him quiet, lay a sleeping, newborn baby boy. He looked no more than 2 days old. Silas stared, his brain refusing to process the image. "What? Whose baby is this?" "It's an orphan." "Your Grace," the washerwoman sobbed, falling to her knees. "From the Rookeries in Whitechapel. Her Grace. She paid me £50 to bring him in the back way when the storm started. She said she wanted to surprise you." The glass finally slipped from Silas's fingers and shattered on the floor. "A changeling," Ilara whispered, stepping closer to Silas until she was inches from his face. "She was never pregnant, Silas. The faintness, the sickness, the swelling, all a lie. She bought padding from a theatrical costumer. She bought a baby from the slums. She played you for a fool." "No," Silas whispered, shaking his head. "No, I saw her. I felt the child move." "You felt what she wanted you to feel," Ilara said. "Come, let us go upstairs and congratulate the mother." I can't. You must," Ilara said, her voice hard as iron. She grabbed his arm. "You chose her, Silas. You humiliated me before God and the king to choose her. You owe it to yourself to see what you bought with your honor." She dragged the shell-shocked Duke out of the library and up the grand staircase. Liam followed, guarding the rear to ensure no servants interfered. They reached the door to the master bedroom. Screams were coming from inside, high-pitched, dramatic shrieks of agony. "Oh, the pain! The pain!" Lydia's voice wailed. "Is the doctor here yet? Where is the doctor?" "The doctor was delayed by the storm," Ilara said to Silas as they stood outside the door. Convenient, isn't it? She planned to have the baby born before he arrived. Elara didn't knock. She threw the door open. Lydia was lying in the massive four-poster bed, thrashing around her face, flushed sweat, or perhaps water from a basin glistening on her forehead. Her maid, a conspirator in the plot, was wringing her hands by the bedside. "Push, your grace, push!" the maid cried. Lydia let out a blood-curdling scream. "It's coming, I feel it." "Stop it, Lydia," Elara said. The room froze. Lydia sat bolt upright, the agony vanishing from her face in an instant. She stared at the doorway, seeing Elara, Liam, and most terrifying of all, Silas. "Silas!" Lydia gasped, pulling the duvet up to her chin. You shouldn't be here. It's not proper. The baby is coming." Silas walked into the room. He looked like a dead man walking. He didn't look at Lydia's face. He looked at the mound of the duvet covering her stomach. "Where is the baby, Lydia?" Silas asked, his voice hollow. It's almost here." Lydia stammered, her eyes darting around the room, looking for the laundry basket that was supposed to be hidden behind the screen. "Just a few more minutes." "The baby is downstairs," Silas said. "In a laundry basket, with the woman you paid to steal him." Lydia's face went white. The color drained away so fast she looked like a corpse. I don't know what you mean. That's a lie. Elara is lying to you. She's jealous. Get up," Silas said. "I can't. I'm in labor." "Get up!" Silas roared a sound so primal and full of rage that the maid shrieked and fled the room. Lydia trembled. She slowly, painfully climbed out of the bed. She stood in her white nightgown, her hands clutching her swollen belly. "It's real, Silas," she wept. "I swear it's real." Silas looked at Elara. Elara nodded. Silas stepped forward. He reached out a trembling hand and grabbed the front of Lydia's nightgown. He ripped it open. There was no skin. There was no flesh. Underneath the silk strapped to Lydia's torso with heavy bandages was a dense, curved pillow made of horsehair and velvet. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Lydia looked down at the pillow, then up at Silas. She burst into hysterical tears. "I did it for you," she screamed, falling to her knees and clutching his legs. "I did it for us. I knew I wasn't pregnant, but I couldn't lose you. I needed an heir to secure my position. I just wanted to be a good wife." Silas stared down at the sister of the woman he should have married. He looked at the pillow, a grotesque mockery of fatherhood. He kicked her away. Not hard, but with absolute revulsion. "You are not a wife," Silas spat, looking down at her with cold hatred. "You are a monster." He turned to Elara. For the first time since that day at the altar, Silas really looked at her. He saw the strength in her posture. He saw the intelligence in her eyes. He saw the woman who had built an empire in months while he had let his crumble. He saw the partner he could have had, the dynasty they could have built together. Elara. Silas whispered, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I made a mistake. Elara looked at him. She felt the old ghost of affection, the memory of the letters she used to write him. But it was dead. It had died the moment he looked at Lydia on their wedding day. "Yes, Silas," Elara said softly. "You did. A mistake that cost you everything." "Forgive me," he begged, reaching for her hand. "Help me fix this. We can annul this marriage. I can claim fraud. We can start over. I will marry you, Elara. Properly this time. I will give you everything." Elara looked at his hand, then at Liam, who was watching her with a stoic, guarded expression. Liam, who had believed in her when she had nothing. Liam, who respected her mind, not just her womb. Elara stepped back, out of Silas's reach. "You have nothing left to give me, Silas," she said. "I have my own money. I have my own house. And I have my own pride." She looked down at Lydia, sobbing on the floor in her ruined nightgown and fake belly. "You wanted the pretty sister Silas. You wanted the fairy tale." "Well," Elara gestured to the weeping woman. "Here is your fairy tale. I hope you enjoy the ending." Elara turned on her heel. "Come, Liam. We have work to do in the morning." As they walked down the grand staircase, leaving the wails of the broken couple behind them, Elara felt lighter than air. The revenge was complete. She hadn't needed to destroy Silas. She just needed to let him destroy himself. They walked out into the rain. The storm was breaking. "You didn't take him back," Liam said quietly as he helped her into the carriage. "He's still a duke. You could have been a duchess." Elara looked at Liam, rain dripping from her eyelashes. She smiled a true, genuine smile. "I don't want to be a duchess, Liam. I'm a queen of industry. It pays much better." Liam laughed a rich, warm sound. He took her hand in the dark carriage and didn't let go. "To the warehouse, then?" he asked. "To the future," Elara replied. 5 years later, the scandal of the Blackwood heir was nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the smoking rooms of London clubs. The House of Blackwood had fallen into obscurity. Silas Thorne humiliated and bankrupt after the annulment, and the subsequent lawsuits from his investors had retreated to a drafty, crumbling hunting lodge in the Scottish Highlands. He lived there alone, a bitter man surrounded by the ghosts of his own pride. Lydia, stripped of her title and rejected by society, had been quietly sent to a convent in rural France, her journey funded by a modest, pitying allowance provided by Elara herself. But on the bustling docks of the Thames, the past was irrelevant. The future was being built. Elara stood at the prow of the Lady Vance, the newest and largest steamship in the Sterling Vance fleet. The wind whipped her hair, which she now wore loose and free, defying the stiff fashions of the aristocracy. She wasn't just a wealthy woman. She was a titan of industry, her name stamped on crates and shipping manifests across the globe. "Penny for your thoughts," Liam's voice came from behind her. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. He was no longer just the rough outcast from the ironworks. He was the most powerful industrialist in England, and more importantly, he was her husband. "I was thinking," Elara said, leaning back into his warmth, "that I should send Silas a thank-you note." Liam chuckled, the sound vibrating against her back. "Thank him, the man who left you at the altar. Whatever for choosing the wrong sister." Elara smiled, turning in his arms to face him. Her eyes sparkled with a happiness she had never known in the stiff drawing rooms of her youth. "If he hadn't broken my heart, I never would have found my spine. And I never would have walked into your foundry." Liam looked down at her with fierce adoration. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "He wanted a duchess," Liam whispered, leaning in close. He was too foolish to realize he was throwing away a queen. He kissed her, then a deep, lingering seal on a partnership that had conquered London. As the ship's horn blasted, signaling the start of a new voyage, Elara looked out at the endless horizon. She had lost a title, but she had won the world. And that is the story of Lady Elara Vance. She proved that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the beginning of your best life. Silas chose the pretty lie, but Elara built the beautiful truth. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and sweet revenge, please like this video. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. Do you think Elara should have forgiven Lydia, or did her sister get exactly what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts below. Thanks for watching.